if you think about where we're coming from, we've touched so many places, right? There's so many angles in the cloud, right? We've done CI/CD, for example, that deployed stuff. Although those things are, if you think about it, what I'm teaching you here is a mindset. Trust me, it's not. There's no way I can tell you everything that happens in the cloud or everything that you need to know, right? I'm teaching you a mindset. I'm just more or less like bootstrapping you. That's what you should take from me, right? I'm bootstrapping you. I'm just trying to help you see the big picture, right? But there's more. There is really more. But at least up till now, we've been able to use CloudFront. We've been able to use CloudFront to host an S3 bucket, for example. We've been able to use ALB, to power like a machine. We've been able to do a thing or two, right? But if you think about it, the only security we've talked before now has been IAM, right? Which more or less like it's more just identity. That's really identity access management, but it's also a form of security, right? Because you need to know, for example, who has access to what. Sometimes in a small organizations this still don't matter, but when your organizations become very big, and that's how the real world is, right? It's like one organization, you have so many accounts, you have so many departments. So the AWS account you're dealing with today in complexity is going to grow over time, right? So at the end of the day, it means that there has to be like a security culture in the company, right? So builders are building. Someone has to put an eye on things, right, to make sure you can block intrusion, or you can make sure that your secrets are not leaked. There's so many things you can do. So that's what we're going to be today. We're actually going to be focusing on AWS security and compliance. It's a long class, right? We'll just be looking at all the security tools, that are in AWS, right? So how do you stay secure? And now you've conquered everything that has to do with scaling. You've conquered everything that has to do with being global in minutes. But now you're in the cloud. What are the things you need to pay more attention to, right, to secure your workload? So this is also important for those who are in cybersecurity and you want to see what it takes to secure your workloads in the cloud. That's really what I'll be talking about today. Okay. So we'll look at some of the things. Here, I'm not going to mention IAM because we did go through a class where we discussed IAM, right? Policies, and we've been playing with them. We've been using them, right? So I'm not going to do that. But I'm still going to just remind you. I think I've talked about the shared responsibility model before, but here I'm just going to just refresh your mind, and you would actually see how we've been using it up to this point, right? So we'll talk about the shared responsibility model, and we'll also look at some services, right? So Guard Duty Inspector, Macy. We'll see what compliance looks like when you're not in the cloud, right? Things you have so many moving parts. How do you do compliance and governance in the cloud? We'll see network security. These things are all the things in the slide, but I don't think we can finish them today. So it's like two classes. We'll do one half today and then do the other half next time, right? We'll do data protection. We'll see organization and what it takes to secure that. And then best practice, obviously, I always say that every time I go through like a series just for you to understand, right? So shared responsibility model, I'm not going to stress on it, right? It's really security of the cloud and security in the cloud, right? So if you think about it, of the cloud is always going to be an AWS responsibility, right? But once you are in the cloud, you who is going into the cloud, you have to ensure that security, because why? You're the one launching your services. You're the one creating buckets. You're the one creating machines. So those things that you launch, you have to follow best practice to make sure they're secure, right? That's just what the shared responsibility model is. I think I mentioned it at the beginning, but again in this class I'll be showing you how we've been doing it, right? We've been doing a good job at that, right? So security of the cloud itself is really the things you don't see. The infrastructure, like I said, all the things you're getting are the things we used to have on premise, right? But now it's like they're virtual devices, networking and all that. So those physical devices will still be stored, will still be secured by AWS. So the physical infrastructure, the hardware, all the managed service configurations, right? That makes those things work well. AWS will still do that for you. But in your own case, every service that you launch in the cloud, whatever, it depends. Whether it's data you're trying to save, you have to ensure that it's protected, right? So and again, we've seen IaaS, platform as a service, software as a service. It just depends on which model, right, you are operating, and that will determine how much of responsibility is given to you, right? In some cases, like if you are doing infrastructure as a service, more of the responsibility would come towards you, right? But if you are doing software as a service, less of that responsibility is also going to come to you, right? So, and then, so when you think about infrastructure as a service, like I said, that's like you're doing the EC2, right? So there you have to own more, right? You have to own more. You have to upgrade. For example, patch your OS. If you have like an OS you've agreed to, so some patching is going to happen there, right? So what it means is that in that place you're doing more. You're still doing more of the shared responsibility model compared to if AWS was just the one doing managing everything from you, right? So, but when you think about so the physical security, the networking infrastructure, AWS is still going to do that. What about container services? All right. So if you think about container services, for example, you are still going to do like the data encryption, right? Making sure you're using encryption, making sure you're using IAM where necessary, right? And the network controls that you have to have, right? What about things like S3, DynamoDB? We've seen it. Sometimes you need to apply policies just to make sure someone from the outside cannot see your data. So like data classification, who has access to what? I think we've seen all these things. And throughout our journey up to this point, we've been doing, to some extent that, right? You set a bucket policy, for example, to shield the public from that bucket. Or if it's EC2, you use like a security group to say, I only want my IP address to be able to see it, right? But there is really something I need to take note of, which is at the end of the slide, is the higher the abstraction, the more AWS responsibility. And that just means that the more you're using the service that is abstracted from you, the more less of the responsibility you are taking, right? And that's where a lot of this serverless shines, right? You don't really care about what is happening behind the scene. Yours is you bring your work and it's done, right? So abstraction does a lot there. And obviously there are some shared controls, patch management, for example, configuration management. If you have to more or less like do some configuration, right? Um, there's like shared responsibility. AWS will do theirs, and then you have to do your. What about awareness and training? It's exactly what I'm doing to you right now. I'm teaching you. I'm trying to more or less like show you how things are done. That's how in an organization the company will train the staff to make sure they're doing the right thing. So AWS is obviously doing their own training. Companies will also train their staff, right? Just to make sure everybody's on board. So that's like shared. And yeah, there's always going to be that shared control. So I'm not going to talk much about it. It's just here in the slide so that you can read on it and just make sure that it's a mindset you are developing, that if you move to the cloud, some things you'll be responsible, some things to be shared responsibility, right? All right. So that brings us to AWS organizations. I'm not going to stress on this, all right? Because I'm bringing it here because of the security element of AWS organization that I want to mention, which is which we're going to see, like service control policies. But the thing is that right now you deal with your account, right? So we all have accounts, but these accounts are all individual accounts. In the real world, if you have like, it's not in the real world, like at scale, it's not going to be, you can't manage individual accounts, right? So how real, how deployments, how like production workloads, or like how organizations are set up in AWS, for example, is that there is really the concept of like centralized management of these accounts that we're talking about. So my account, your account, someone else's account can be under an organization, right? So what it means is that it's just a centralized way of managing this account, right? Because if you have to manage one individually, at some point it's going to be a lot. So what it means is that you can do billing all together, right? All the bills that come right now, your bill is sent to you, but in the real world, bills will come from multiple accounts and they're passed up to like a management account, right? But again, what I really wanted to call out is the service control policies that happens there, because what it means is that at an organizational level, there is like policies you can set that can decide even what is possible within an account, right? And that's like, it's a better way of doing it. Instead of doing it in an account, you can't do it at an organization level, and that just trickles down to all the accounts, right? So think about it. It's one step above what we're already currently doing. And right now we have like accounts, we're managing just one account, right? But just think about it, that if you already know the best practice in one account, aggregate all that and do it at a management level, that's really AWS organizations, right? But there's more to it, but that's really the concept. You understand how to do best practice in one account, and then you take that best practice and then you cascade it to a management account, and then you trickle it down again, right? And that's really the concept of AWS organization. And that's why you see the image there's something on top, and then you have like three sub accounts beneath it, right? So obviously, consolidated bidding, like I said, all the bills can go to, they can all propagate to one account. You can do compliance. From the management account, you can roll down compliance to the other accounts, meaning you can actually set templates, right, of how the other account should behave. And why I'm mentioning it right here is really because of the service control policies, because it's like it's a security guardrail that you will be using when you are dealing with an AWS organization, right? So common patterns is you usually have like an organization for production, maybe an org unit called dev, and that allows you to set some policies. Maybe in production you can't do some certain things, right? Remember, production again can be multiple accounts, right? It could be multiple accounts. Think about it, production can be 3 different accounts depending on the product. Maybe these things it's about planning, it's about how you organize things. But think about like an organization, maybe like a prod org, a prog organization, and in there you have multiple accounts, right? That are prod accounts, and then you can set policies that say within this account you can do XYZ, right? So that's also how it works. You can also do department based, meaning you can split the organizational unit based on department or project specific. As you grow, you begin to see these patterns and how it depends on which pattern you want to choose. But people choose different preference, some by environment, some by department. And then you can even have security and login account, which means like your logs can be sent to a different account. Security can be managed. Like I said, some people have like an organization where security, they have like a team that is doing the security, right? So you can have like a security account, and that is also more or less like doing security on behalf of the organization, right? But we'll see that maybe at some point at an advanced level. So let's now talk about service control policies, which is the one that concerns us, right? It's just the fact that you can have nested, you can have like organizations, right? So the root account is obviously like the most senior account in there, right? And in there you have like an organization, and in that organization is now where you can pretty much have like sub organizations. They call them organizational units, right? So OUs. And in there, what it means is that you can now trickle down policies, right? And they are just they're like IAM policies that we've seen. It's just that they're called service control policies. And the whole idea is that you really can trickle down. You can decide what anyone can do in a given account, right? So if you don't permit something at a level, something like account B or account A will not be able to do that, right? So for example, you can prevent account closure, right? So if an account is within the organization, you can prevent and make sure it cannot be closed. You can restrict regions and say, okay, I'm only in US West 2. You can't do anything in EU Central 1, right? Organization makes that kind of thing easy to do. You can block expensive CPUs. You can say in this organization, you can't launch GPUs or some set of instances, right? You can also enforce tagging in that kind of organization. And then you're still going to use SCP. There's still a lot of elements of like using IAM for it, right? So at the end of the day, it's really a thing that SCP really controls organizational policies, right? But IAM is basically specific to like you can use IAM to lock down an account, but you can use service control policies to really operate at an organizational level. So you can tie a policy to just one single OU, right? So SCP is really a security angle that we need to see from just organization, right? We won't be able to delve very deep into organization now, but it's good we introduce that there's like a service control policy that you can use to apply policies that can control a given OU and decide what anyone in that organizational unit can do. Remember, an OU can have multiple accounts, right? So it's something you need to take out. So let's now talk about one of the very important services in AWS, and this one is really nice, and we will go into the console to see something about it. But it's the service called AWS Config. If you think about how we used to look at our accounts right now, we do stuff, right? We're doing things, we're changing buckets, we're creating EBS volumes and all that. But again, think about it that we've seen CloudTrail, right? CloudTrail just tells you who did what. We extensively looked at CloudTrail to say who did what, when was it done, how was it done, and all that. But again, AWS config is a bit different because it's basically recording your configuration changes, right? So all the changes that are happening over time, it is recording it. It's different from API calls, right? It's the changes that are happening. So when a bucket is created, whatever thing is used to create, and then when that bucket changes, right? Maybe you add an attribute, all that life cycle is kept in AWS config. And there's a reason why that is important, because if you want to know when a bucket, for example, lost its encryption, right? There should be something that tells you about that, which is where AWS config shines, right? CloudTrail will tell you who did it, right? But config is going to record that change, that configuration change, right? So change tracking and history maintenance is really what config is good for, compliance monitoring. And again, these things are now beginning to become important, especially when you're talking about compliance, you're talking about security, right? Because in the real world, you want to be able to track when was something done, how was it done, and all that. And you can also see resource relationship, like the relationship between these resources as at the time. It also helps you to see dependency tracking, to see when it happened, all the entities that were involved, right? So you can obviously see point in time, resource snapshots, right? So that's one thing that's one thing you're sure of seeing. Like, so over time you can see, like, if you look at a resource, you can actually see the life cycle, right? You can obviously see the change history, so timeline of resource change. And then you can see more or less like the configuration snapshots, right? What is set right now, what is in place. And then you can do real-time change notification. I think we've seen that with AWS. What it means is that if you are recording configuration change, you can't track that. You can't use something like EventBridge to pretty much track that and report on it, right? So you still can stream that event and use it to more or less like whether it's notification you want to do, or you want to trigger an action, or you want to do something else, right? So what really powers AWS config is config rules, right? So you set rules to say, for example, I want to know when this thing happens, right? Maybe, for example, you want to set a rule that says, I want to know if if a bucket does not have like an encryption attached to it, right? So if you want to track that kind of policy, you just need to set a rule for it in AWS config. And at a point, it's going to tell you it's non-compliant. It's going to tell you exactly why it's non-compliant. And we're going to see that just now. But just know there's AWS managed rule, as we've seen, right? There are many rules because AWS has seen so many customers. They can use similar patterns and you can reuse them without doing yours. You can also use custom rules, right? The ones that you want to do for yourself, right? And then you can do like evaluation, like how often you want to do it, whether you want to do it periodically or you want to do it when there's actually a change in the resource. And then you can do remediation, more or less like if this thing happens, which action are you going to take, right? With the help of automation documents. So for example, there are like popular rules like S3 buckets rights, public right is prohibited. To see, there's also one to see if an EBS volume has an encryption. If the root MFA is enabled, these are all like very good best practices to have, and you can and one way, because if you're not in an organization where there's so many resources, right, different accounts, config can bring everything together in such a way that you can see what is compliant versus what is not compliant, right? For example, you can see security group. You know how we play with security group? Sometimes we extend it to 000/0, but sometimes you also want to have a check that says if this thing is ever there, then I want to be aware or I want to know, right? So to restrict SSH. So compliance auditing is something. Security analysis, change management. Those are three angles that this falls under, right? And then when you now think about remediation, obviously custom rules, you can use Lambda function to write those custom compliance logic, right? But again, if you think about the remediation actions themselves, you obviously will use something like automation document from Systems Manager. We did see Systems Manager, but we didn't really go in depth, right? But under the hood, config is going to use Systems Manager to do some remediation for you. And we're going to see an example, right? Compliance pack is also conformance pack is also something you're going to see, more or less like so many rules, you put them together as a pack and then you can deploy that, right? So let me just let's go and see a typical example of what that is going to look like. Just give me a second now. Let's see. I think this is my account. Can you? Okay, you guys can see my screen, right? All right, so let's go. Let's look at config, AWS config. So we'll go to config. Just give me a second. All right, so let's go to AWS config. Let's see what it looks like. Um, so you can see record and evaluate configurations of your AWS resources, meaning just it's really the recording, right? But like I said, it's like you can keep a history, you can pretty much go back to it and see exactly what is happening, right? So, and they're basically powered by rules, right? So rules are what powers them, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to let's see, I'm just going to go to, first of all, I'm going to go to S3, okay? So I'm just going to go to S3, okay? Then click on this. Let me see if I have any bucket. Okay, I do have some buckets. So like this one is here. Let me see. So I do have some buckets, right? So my custom bucket Brainyl crowd, I do have some buckets. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here. I'm just going to do is set up AWS config. In this case, I'm just going to do let me try and see if I can do one-click setup. Confirm. Yeah, I'm just trying to go the fast role does not exist. Let me see. I'm just looking for the fastest way to. Oh, okay, let me just go back and do it the other way around then. So I'm just going to go get started. All resources types with customizable overrides. Maybe I want to care only for certain resources. So in this case, I'm going to do S3. So S3 bucket, choose frequency, continuous. That's what I want to do. Use an existing or choose one from. I'm just going to use an existing. Choose a bucket. I'm just going to leave everything as is. I'm not going to do stream right now. So but you can't have stream if you wanted. So I'm just going to do next. So here is where it's saying manage rule, right? So you can see like we have like 603. You have like so many manage rule here that we can use. But I'm just going to search for S3, and in this case, maybe I'll just be looking for. Let me see. Let me see if you can search and just. My system is slowing down, but so let's see S3. Let me scroll down a bit and see which one we can use. There's so many here, like right. We can even use maybe we can use a very simple one that says S3 bucket versioning, for example, right? We could use that very simple one, right? So let's try that one. So here we are saying S3 bucket versioning enabled. I'm just going to go next, and then I'm going to confirm. So we created a very basic one, right? Like I said, config can do everything within, can basically check compliance for all the services that you have within your account, especially the services you care about. In this case, I'm just being restricted. I'm not doing much. So if you see for my rules, for example, I'm only doing like, S3 bucket versioning enabled. That's the rule I currently have. You know, because we just created it, we're going to give it some time to more or less like try and find, the things that are compliant and the things that are not compliant. But I know that I definitely have some buckets here, right? So if I go to properties, and I think we've seen versioning, right? You know what versioning means, right? So in some cases it's important, like some buckets, you really need to have them versioned. But in some cases you also don't need versioning, right? So it depends on your use case. Maybe for certain buckets, you actually want them to be versioned. And then that's why you should create like a config rule to see pretty much what's happening, right? In this case, you can see bucket versioning for this bucket is actually disabled, right? It's currently not disabled, it's currently disabled. So I'm just going to give it some time. Let's see if it does its thing. You can see when I refreshed, the UI has changed, right? 5 non-compliant resource, 1 compliant resource, right? So let's go to the 5 non-compliant, right? Remember, these resources are all inside of the AWS account, and you can choose exactly the kind of rules that you care about, the kind of things you want to remediate if you feel they're like security threats to what you are building. So in this case, it looks at my inventory, for example, it tells me exactly what is non-compliant. And if you see, for example, when I was looking here, I knew this guy is not going to be compliant because I can see clearly. If I zoom in, let me just zoom in so that you see, I can see clearly that this bucket doesn't have versioning enabled, right? And then I've already set a config rule that tells me if it is enabled or not. And then in this case, it's already telling me the ones that are non-compliant. So let me click, because I'm on right, I'm looking at the bucket, which is my custom Brainyl, bucket. And then I'm just going to go to that bucket itself and see exactly what's happening. So here you can see, for example, it says it has this rule. It's actually not compliant, right? So that's actually what it's showing me. Let's see if we see anything around resource timeline. You can actually see it links you to CloudTree, right? For example, yeah, my UI is a bit slow, but you can see things like, put public access block, put bucket tagging, many of these events were recorded, right, on that particular bucket. So there's this tight integration, like CloudTree we've seen, it tells you who did what, right? But config can actually tell you the life cycle of that particular resource. But what I really care about in this case is the fact that it's non-compliant, right? So there are many things we can do here. The first thing is just to more or less like go back and say, let's go back and say, for example, this one. Let's just, for this example, because I know there are other non-compliant examples, but let's just do this one. Let's say bucket versioning. Let's save the changes and enable this one, right? So in this case, we are just going to enable bucket versioning here. So if you notice, what you see here is that For this particular bucket, we've enabled versioning. So I expect that, did it say it's still disabled? Bucket versioning, enable, save changes. Is my UI just not refreshing? Okay, yeah, I can see it is enabled now, right? So now that it's enabled, I think if we give this guy time, it's going to go back to being compliant again, right? Because think about it, somebody else might own this. This might be someone's responsibility because he's not. There are people are creating buckets across multiple teams. People are in different organizations. But someone who is like security, who security is his own business, can be at one place and is looking at everything and trying to see, oh, the policy within the organization will not allow you to create buckets that are non-versioned, right? So this is a place where in one shot you can see all the buckets in your organization that doesn't have versioning. You can also see things like, oh, which are the EBS volumes that you're using that are non-encrypted, right? And then you can even use remediation, which is something I'm going to show you afterwards. But let's go back and see. Let me try and refresh this page. Because we did put continuous check, so after a while, I think it will do its thing. Right now, it's still non-compliant, right? But let me click on it and see for this particular bucket. So I'm going to click on it and then do resource timeline, right? So resource timeline, you can see, I think this is today is 18, right? Yes, today is 18. You can see there's a configuration change, right? This was just now, right? So you can see we did change from status being off, right? So versioning being off to status being enabled. So it has recorded that. And I think it's going to do a re-evaluation again to see if you are still compliant or if you are non-compliant. But you can see that it did record that change. And if you see it, if you scroll, if I try to go back, this is you see, it did start from like a CloudTrail event, right? So there's like a CloudTrail event. You can see the person that did it. It's me. Sometimes again, it's hard to like filter on CloudTrail event, but Config can put everything together. And then you can also do configuration change. You can exactly see, who did, this is really the resource, the person that did it, what he did and all that. So those configuration changes are there. And you can also see it for the lifetime of that, the timeline. It's always going to be there. So let's go back to the bucket and see what happens. It has recorded the change. And you can see from non-compliant, it has changed back to compliant, right? So we started from being non-compliant, and then we went and fixed it ourselves manually, right? And then it became compliant. Okay. So what if let's still go back. If we go back to the resources, for example, I think there's still some that are, so we'll go to compliance dashboard, right? Remember, we're talking about security. So you could do this as part of your job, but also this could be very handy for somebody who is like who's handling security as part of his job, right? So let's also see this one. There's this my demo TikTok bucket Brainyl, blah blah blah. It's non-compliant, right? So in this case, what we can do is that we can actually go back to our rule and say, for example, so that bucket, we know that bucket is which one is this dev bucket, right? So it's this one. And as usual, the versioning, it really is not enabled, right? It's disabled in this case. So we can go back to that rule. Where's that rule again? I think it's here. Where was that? Sorry, I'm in rules. I'll go here, and then I'm going to do manage remediation, right? Because the thing is that aside looking at what is changing, looking at the compliance status, people going there to fix it manually, you can force remediation to happen, right, on your behalf. So here we're going to say, let's see if there is like a remediation for that. So let's see versioning. So configure S3 versioning is one that is enabled, right? So what it means is that, here is saying configure S3 bucket versioning, right? That's really the rule we said. We said if a bucket does not have versioning, please, say it's not compliant. But here we're actually trying to take a step forward. So it says input parameters, the bucket name, versioning state is optional. The assume rule, blah, at least there's a rule for you to use automation document to do it. But for the most important thing, it needs a bucket name, right? So what it means is that I just need to go down here and do bucket name. So at least I have to give it like a bucket name. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this bucket name and paste here, right? For that, I'm going to go to IAM and create an automation. I'm creating a new role. I'm going to create a new role because I need to give it a role that it needs to use, right? So I need to give it a role. Versioning state, pretty much when set to suspended, this is when set to enabled. Yeah, optional ARN of the allows automation to perform the actions. Let's see if it's going to use I think we would need a role just so that it works out of the box. So what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to create an IAM role, right? So I'll just call it, create a simple role. I'm just going to call it, who's going to use it? It's going to be used by systems manager, right? So systems manager is going to use it, and I'm just going to call it, for now, I'm just going to give it S3 full access. Remember, it's trying to remediate a bucket, right? So it needs access to do that thing. So in this case, because for the want of time, I don't need to craft like a unique policy. I can just give it S3 full access for now, temporarily, for just this work, right? So what it means is I can call it S3 S3, maybe remediator or something. Let me just use this, right? So systems manager is going to use that to remediate whatever we want to do. It has been created, right? So I'm just going to look for the role, remediator, and this is the role here. This is the ARN. So I'm going to go back to this remediation, right? In this case, this is the bucket name, right? But here I'm actually giving it like an automation role that I also want to use as part of trying to fix that bucket, right? So in this case, okay, so I'm just going to use enabled, right? So I'm just going to put enabled here, and then I'm going to save the changes. So remember, we did this for like one bucket, right? So specifically, we're targeting one bucket. But ideally, it could be trickled down for all the resources if you wanted. So what it means is that here, you can see still disabled, right? So we're just going to give it time and see what is going to happen. So let's go back to the rule. Bucket versioning is enabled. There is still one non-compliant bucket that is there. So let's give it some time. So it does have like a rule. It has this remediator. It has the buckets, and we're seeing, enabled, right? In this case, I think we are just limiting it to one bucket, but I think you probably can, um, set this to basically target the exact resource you're pushing for, right? So let's give it some time. Let me refresh this and see if that has actually, if it has happened. I don't know, but let's see. It's still bucket versioning is still disabled, right? So let's give it some time. While that is going on, let's go back to our dashboard. And usually it's going to take some time. It's not immediate, right? But we still see there are still three non-compliant buckets. Let's see, what else can we see? But again, you can see your resources, right? You can filter for your inventory to see, things that are happening there. Like I said, you can also have like conformance facts, more or less like it's just like collection of rules. So in this case, we created just one rule. So if you go to this place, we created a rule, but you can also have like a conformance fact and put all those rules in one place and manage them as a single entity, right? Instead of creating them individually. But I'm really interested in seeing if this has taken place. Let me see. Let me refresh. It's still disabled. But let me go back to the uh, dashboard and see three non-compliant resource and see that bucket, the bucket itself, right? So the dev bucket, and see record timeline, resource timeline, for example. So what it means is this, I'm just trying to see what's happening. I'm not sure what the time is right now, but the last time it looks like it was this 54. Let's see what happened in this case. Bucket key enabled. I think this was 8:54, right? I think this is not very recent, right? So let's just give it time. Yeah, usually config would take some time to do its thing, but let's see. This is obviously today, but it hasn't really recorded what has changed just yet. And I think this is the bucket, right? It's still not enabled yet, but let's give it some time. So let's go to rules, three evaluation. Let's give it some time. So here, remember, we have like a bucket. It could be other things, right? There's so many rules you can create, whether it's AWS managed rule or your own rule, right? But the thing is that we did give it like a bucket. We did give it a state that we want it to be. So we're just going to give it time. I think it usually takes time for it to do its thing, right? While that is ongoing, we'll just continue to the slide, okay? We'll continue to slide and come back to the UI once it's done. But everything is set up correctly. We'll just revisit it probably when we get to like the next time we're coming back to the UI, okay? So let's give it some time. So if you see what we did, right? We created a rule, and the rule was just to help us see bucket, for example, in this case, like an S3 bucket that didn't have versioning, right? Remember, we've seen what versioning is as at the time we're dealing with it, like S3 bucket. But in this case, it's more or less like we're looking at it from a security angle, right? Maybe developers are creating buckets, but someone is also there trying to make sure security best practices are applied for those resources, which in this case, we're using versioning as an example, but there are many other examples that you can use, right? And we're trying to test automation document remediating that. So we'll come back to that, okay? And that brings us to like certificate management. So if you think about the way we've been issuing, like we've been creating S3, for example, EC2 instances, we've also created like a load balancer that balances traffic between several EC2 instances, right? But again, most times if you notice how we've been testing it, we've been doing HTTP, right? But in the real world, every URL you go to, for it to be even trusted, right? It has to be put behind like a what do you call it, an HTTPS endpoint, right? If you send your URL to someone and say it's HTTP, they won't trust you. They want to ensure that your website is actually secure, right? So that all the transactions that are happening there are actually secure. So what it means is that in AWS, there's also a service that can give you certificates, right? So usually the way it works is that you get a domain. Usually people buy certificates and then, more or less like connect them together. But in AWS, there's really a service that can help you do it, and it's easy to issue, right? You can use certificates across all the services that support it, right? So, and it's free. So it's free SSL, TLS certificates for your AWS services, especially the ones that support it, right? So there's also automatic renewal. You don't need to do anything, right? Once it's time, it renews. There's easy deployments, like I said, so services that support it, so things like CloudFront, ALB, API Gateway, they all would use certificate at one point, right? Because they're front-facing. CloudFront, someone will have to see it from your URL, from like a public URL. ALB, the same. API Gateway, remember, certificates at the end of the day would abstract. You have your own your domain name, for example. So let's call it brainyl.com, right? And that brainyl.com, you issue a certificate for it, and then you would use that certificate for all the resources that needs to use brainyl.com to communicate. So for example, if your CloudFront is going to be placed behind that domain, then that certificate has to back it, right? So and you can also support wildcard certificates, which means everything, maybe start.something, start.brainyl.com, you can use that certificate to match all the traffic that is going to come from that, right? So there's public certificates, which is internet facing, and you can also get private certificates, but those are expensive. I remember one time we tried getting one and it was really, really expensive. So they are expensive, but for the public ones, it's free. You can always get the free ones, right? Validation, you can have the domain validated option. The whole idea there is that you can basically, if you own the domain, the validation can happen for you automatically, right? So, and you can also choose like either you're doing the DNS route or you're using an email route. But it's so easy for you to set certificates in ACM, in AWS Certificate Manager, right? And you obviously need them for a lot of your services that need some certificates like the ones that I mentioned. If it's front facing, if it has to be exposed via like an HTTPS endpoint, a secure TLS or HTTPS endpoint, then you need a certificate. And with ACM, it's easy to manage, and so you can it integrates with CloudFront, application load balancer. So it's as simple as issuing a certificate and using it. So those are the two things. There's not much to say there, right? And ACM can actually help you do all the renewals, all the so it integrates well with many of these services that are there, right? So cost savings also is free. Like I said, if it's public, it's really free. It's only the private one that is that you have to pay, right? Automatic lifecycle management is one thing you benefit. So if it's time for renewal, it's going to do that on your behalf. Security, obviously strong encryption standards. Everything in AWS is really it goes with the high standard, right? So the security there for the certificates that you're going to be issuing, you're obviously going to also follow like all the security standards that are out there. So think about it. We've played with ALB. If you now want to put that behind an HTTPS endpoint, you need like a certificate, right? You can't bring your own certificate, but ACM makes it easy. So in the AWS world, you would naturally use like ACM to just issue certificates and you're good. So that brings us to more or less like one thing that is common in applications, because the thing is that when you're dealing with EC2 machines, for example, that is just within your VPC, right? Usually you are the only one that has the IP address. You're the only one going there. But in the real world, your URL is public, right? Anyone that has that domain can hit it, right? And that's where we need to start talking about other things like distributed denial of service, right? People call it it's popularly called DDoS, and the whole idea is just distributed denial of service. It's very simple, right? You have a website that is publicly available to the internet, right? And someone is somewhere sending more or less like fake traffic to that site, right? Obviously, there's some more details to it, but the whole idea is that someone is just launching several requests, right, to that your website. So what it means is that at the end of the day, they are going to deprive legitimate traffic access to your website. Because if legitimate people are trying to access your website and they cannot, because someone else is already flooding your website, right, with requests that are not necessary. So as it's written here, it's just like overwhelming traffic. Someone is just obviously there are toolings and all that they use, but the whole idea is that someone is trying to overwhelm your traffic, right? And then when illegitimate traffic is coming in, they'll be seeing timeout or the website is unavailable, right? Service downtime, obviously, reputation damage is one of the issues, the business impact that you can have there, because right, your customers themselves will not have access to, they will not be able to use your website, right? But again, AWS has you covered. Remember, DDoS, you can do DDoS even outside of AWS, but in AWS, there's like tools that can help you just mitigate it, right? So focus on your business and you're paying so much attention trying to set up a DDoS solution, because AWS already has you covered, right? So built-in infrastructure, built-in protection at the infrastructure level, right? So at all the levels. Remember, in AWS, there's like edge computing that happens even through your traffic, and there's like the ones that happen even at your regional level, right? But even at all that level, you can actually get DDoS protection. Okay, so and that's why I mentioned global edge locations. They can actually absorb the traffic, so it won't even get to your server. They can just shut down anything DDoS even before it gets to you, right? Obviously, you can get network layer support, transport layer support, application layer support. And if you remember, I think we did talk about the layers that we have. But one thing you should know is that the application itself is really when you are getting to the application layer, right? And then the infrastructure itself, even the infrastructure before it gets to you, can also be shielded from any DDoS attack that is out there. So let's now look at some of the solutions that AWS has to do that. It's really simple. We have standard. Standard is free, right? So if you wanted to protect yourself from DDoS, you can. Standard is basically free, like so. But it's just that it's not as advanced as Shield, the Shield Advanced, right? But the thing is that with AWS Shield, you can actually you can actually get if you're using the standard version, right, which is free, you can get some very good DDoS protection, right, without even doing much, right? So protection for all your AWS, for all the AWS customers, CloudFront and Route 53 integration, and common attack mitigation. So what it means is that it really doesn't go advanced, but at least you can cover some basic attack surfaces like SYN floods, right? If you know the TCP handshake, you would understand. I don't want to go into details, but if you understand how TCP handshake works, right, you see that SYN, the SYN request itself is the first request that comes in, right? If someone is sending multiple of that without more or less like getting answers back, right, that's like a popular DDoS attack pattern, right? So Shield standard is going to actually protect you even from that. But again, you can go one level higher. It's just that Shield Advanced is a bit more expensive, but it does many of the advanced DDoS protection for you, right? For larger attacks, most if you really care about it. But it's not even about that. It's also the fact that you have like like a 24/7 response team that can help if something goes wrong. Maybe your website is down now because someone is trying to get your application down. You can have a team that's going to help you to resolve it. And also, if you think about cost protection in the sense that if the attack has already happened, right? And it now resulted to there was so many traffic, you had like a load balancer behind it, you were scaling, and then there's now a lot of cost from it. AWS can shield those costs from you. Okay. Yeah, it's obviously integration with WAF for application layer protection. So what does it mean? We still have a service in AWS that really you can integrate it to many of your service, whether it's at the edge or your application load balancers to get protection from DDoS attack, right? We never know. Sometimes you don't see them, but who knows? Who knows? Someone who is trying to just attack your application. So when to use advanced, obviously mission critical applications you don't want to let it go down for whatsoever reason, high value target. If your application is it has a lot of value, you don't want to compromise, right? And again, sometimes compliance is what forces a lot of people to do some things also. So if compliance is like a need, that's one reason people want to also choose advanced, right? And that brings us to, we just talked about DDoS, right? Distributed denial of service, right? But it's different now from like if you think about like web application firewall, right? Because in this case, you're talking about like the firewall that you have for your application, right? And there you're thinking about the common attacks that a web application will be exposed to, right? That's why you have like a WAF. So it's called AWS WAF, which means web application firewall. We've seen firewall at different layers, right? We've seen for network, like network ACLs, we've seen security groups, we've seen how those things like they act like firewall, some to like a subnet, some to like an EC2 machine. But in this case, you can have a firewall also for an application, right? So what it means is that you can do many things now because we know many of the attacks that an application is prone to, right? So things like, for example, if you see that some unusual traffic is coming from a particular person, you can actually filter for that particular traffic and just block them, right? You can also do SQL injection, for example. SQL injection is one thing that is common. Maybe, who knows, maybe the application, there's like a part in the application that would allow SQL injection. SQL injection is just a way where you can pretty much manipulate the SQL that is going to be executed. So instead of doing the right SQL, it's now executing a very bad SQL, right? To get the data that is not intended to come out. So you can do all that. You can do IP address and geographic blocking. So what it means is that specific IP, I don't want to see you on my website. If you're from this country or whatever, I also don't want to see you from this web application. So it's like a firewall. You can set that. There are rules that you can play with, right? You can also do rate limiting. And that's like the question I asked at the beginning. The whole idea is that, oh, this person, I think you are reaching the request, you are reaching this website for too often. Your requests are beginning to look suspicious, and you can rate limit them more or less like in an hour, for example. You can't do more than this number of requests, right? So as with all AWS services, there's usually like the managed rules, right? So managed rules in terms of like rules that AWS gives you, you can just benefit from that. If you see how we're dealing with AWS Config just now, I didn't really have to write any rule, right? I used the one that is there. Here you can also have rules that are there, right? Already managed. And then you can create your own custom rules, right? If you have rules that AWS doesn't have, that will meet your need, you can create yours, right? And then obviously rate-based rules, like I mentioned above. So if you look at the integration point, so if you ever have a cloud, we've seen CloudFront, right? We've used CloudFront. What it means is that you can attach a WAF, web application firewall, to CloudFront, right? All that would just be left is for you to configure. What do you want to block? Do you want to block an IP, or do you want to block like a country, right? Or like a region and block them completely? And then you can also have that even to application load balancer, API gateway. You can have it at AppSync. AppSync is not something we've talked about, but these are all services that are web more or less like web applications, right? That you can put firewall on top, right? It's different. This is obviously different from a network firewall, right? We'll see what the network firewall is also as part of this series, but it's different, right? So if you look at it, pricing is something again that is different, but it's basically by the rules, and there's some complication in terms of like how the pricing is done. But as you have those rules, rules would have to be evaluated for you to block a traffic, right? And that's how the pricing is measured as time goes on. So it's really by the web ACL, the rules, and the request that's processed through that rules. Because remember, you have like requests that is coming in sometimes 1 million, right? And if you have like rules that have to be evaluated, it means they have to go through that evaluation process, right? So all that can dictate your cost. But those are lower level details that we'll see at some point, okay? That brings me to another popular service, which obviously we're going to see in the console in this case, is Inspector. Inspector is nice because why? We live in a world now where everything is containerized. It's like you're using containerized. Yeah, it's a containerized world, right? So even if you think about how agent development is going, most times people deploy things, with containers basically. So what it means is that when you start thinking about containers, you start thinking of your EC2 machines, and you start thinking about your Lambda functions. Sometimes you want to see like, are they secure, whether in terms of the applications, the packages they are running, or the runtime they are using, and you can get all that kind of information. That's where Inspector comes in, right? So automated security assessment service, but it doesn't work for all the services. And usually there's a tool for everything in AWS. In this case, we're specific. It's about EC2, Lambda, and your containers that you're publishing to ECR. So application vulnerability scanning for EC2 and container images is really what it does. Continuous assessment of your running workload. So meaning as your workload is running, that assessment is ongoing, and then you can be informed when something is going wrong. integrated with systems manager for agent deployment, because yeah, if it's doing it against your EC2 machine, then something is in that EC2 machine powering that, and that's where systems manager comes in, right? We've seen that when we're talking about systems manager, and that's why you see that all these things, they connect to themselves. As you keep building competence, you just keep getting better, right? The key features, really, there's an agent in the EC2 machine, and that's what inspector will use to provide you all the things that you want to see. Obviously, for containers, you can have what do you call it, agents in there, but you can have like an agentless mode, right? Obviously, the vulnerabilities itself, there's like a database, right? That shows, how the vulnerability. This is from a common vulnerabilities and exposures database. That's actually the meaning of CVE, right? The whole idea is that it's a well-known database that you can check to say, oh, if yours matches this, then something is obviously wrong, right? And then you can do risk scoring, and the whole idea is just so that you know which ones are high, which ones are medium, or you can rate them. And then there's always like a remediation guidance, like if you do this, you're going to fix this, right? But you see what that looks like in the console just now. Some of these things is better when you see them, right? So pricing, obviously the EC2 instance, ECR images that is obviously scanned, right, and gone through. So when you think about the assessment type, we have like EC2 instance assessment, meaning OS vulnerabilities, configuration issues around the EC2, right? There's also container image. Container image, we know what a container image is. It's a package application. Something has been packaged, like it has been containerized. But again, inspector is able to go into that container and see some of the things you are using and see if there is vulnerability attached to them. And then Lambda function assessment is also something we're going to see, right? So you will see detailed findings with their severity levels, remediation recommendations with specific steps of how to go about them, and then compliance mapping to security standards, right? To see how you're doing regarding that. So if you think about it in the real world, right? In the real world, what it means is that you can even have automation as part of it. Remember, if you see this graph, I don't think, apart from me introducing inspector, if you've been following me on this call, this should be easy for you, right? Because what it means is that you can pretty much deploy a Lambda function, for example, right? And then Amazon inspector can scan for new vulnerability, right? Which is what it was created for, you to be scanning, right? And then once it discovers that something is wrong, right? We know that event bridge, we saw event bridge as part of the last class. We know that event bridge can capture that, yes, I found the vulnerability, right? And that event bridge can basically, trigger an SNS, for example, triggers SNS notification, right? To whoever needs to be aware that something is wrong. And then they receive an email to say, okay, there's actually a vulnerability. It depends on how you want to act, whether you want to act immediately. And then you can actually use like a inspector guidance to prioritize and remediate. What it means is that you can go to check it and then see that, okay, if this is what was wrong, what is the fix that is necessary to, what is necessary for you to fix it, right? Cool. So let's go and see what that looks like in the UI. Let's refresh this. Let's go back to where we were before. So where we were in config. So let me go to dashboard and see how many are still non-compliant. It's still showing 3 are non-compliant, but these guys should be compliant by now. I'm not sure why it's not evaluating yet. Let's see. This one is here. Detective. No outputs. Yeah, this bucket should have been remediated by now, but it's still here. Let's see. 3 compliant resource. Obviously, this one is one of the ones that we did. This one was the one that was made to be compliant. Yeah, I'm not sure why this rule has not evaluated. We gave it everything it needed, because now what we did was basically, okay, let me reevaluate and see. Maybe that is going to help us do what we need to do. So let's reevaluate and see what happens. So go here, and then let's see resource timeline, configuration change. Okay, so let me try something. Audience, let's see, TikTok. So we'll save this change and then give it some time. So while we're there, we'll go to inspector, right? So we'll go to inspector. So I'm still in my account. I'm still in US West 2. I'm just going to go to inspector. Sometimes it requires me to do this, right? So I'm just going to go here. Just trying to check this rule, the rule itself that we created. Let me just be sure of the name, right? It's basically let me see. Okay, let's give it some time. Just wanted to check something. But again, this is inspector. This is what I was talking about. You can see here it gives you more or less like I said, it also depends on who is looking at this, right? You can be looking at this as a developer. You can be looking at this as a network person. Sorry, as a security person. It just depends on what your role entails, right? Config is one place for compliance. You can be doing all that. But inspector is another place. You can also be depending on who. For me, I'm always here because why? I have containers that I'm building. I have developers that are pushing containers also. So I have to be here, right? So findings, you can basically go by container image. Like I said, container images, EC2 instances, and then by vulnerability if you wanted to. But the 3 categories you need to pay attention to is Lambda function, container image, and then the EC2 instance, right? So you can go by vulnerability, for example. So So we'll go by vulnerability. For example, you can see here it says critical, high. It says this one there's zero critical, but it did give some that is high, and then it gave like all. So for this now it has one high vulnerability, right? So for example, if we click on it, it's exactly what it tells you. It tells you, the fix is this is the fix we are running, the installation, the version we are running, but the fix is actually 0.2, 10.4, blah blah blah. So there's like a fix, right? So it makes your job easy. You don't have to you can come here and just see at a glance what is wrong, and then it also gives you a fix. Even if it's code, it can also tell you the line of the code that is referencing what could be vulnerable, right? So you can this is the detail I was trying to tell you, that you can actually see all the vulnerability details and see what exactly you need to do to get it resolved, right? But you can also go by instance. In this case, I think I do have one EC2 instance. It did tell me, it's telling me, some of the things that are in the instance. When you click on it, it gives you, right? So it tells me the severity, they're all high in this case, all these ones, right? For Lambda functions, let me see if I have any Lambda function. I do not have any Lambda function, but if I had Lambda function, it's the same. It's going to show you the Lambda and tell you the details about that Lambda. Remember, Lambda runs code, and the code is usually like in Python or in Java. Like it depends on your runtime that you're using, right? So it can actually tell you if some of the packages that you're installing on that Lambda function, if some of them are vulnerable. Right? It's just a way to make your job a bit easier, right? So you can go to all findings, for example, to see if you wanted to see all, right? But again, there's like a dashboard you can see at a glance. So maybe you just care about dashboard. You're just seeing at a glance, what is well. So in this case, you can see zero critical for EC2 instance, there's zero critical Lambda. But in the real world, if you have so many EC2 machines, so many EC2 instances, so many ECR containers, Lambda functions, then you see many of these numbers, right? Depending on their criticality, right? But that's really what it is. So if you, but just pay attention to the fact that it works with 3 services, right? Your ECR images, the images that you push to ECR, your EC2 machines, like your instances, and then your Lambda functions, right? Because usually that's the trick. Some people don't. When you start seeing so many security services, now sometimes it becomes so many that you don't know which is doing what, right? This is specifically for compute, like all the computes like around your EC2 instance, your ECR. So here it can also tell me by container repository, right? Because ECR itself will have many repositories that you can push container image to it. So this will just help you group it and say, okay, this repo has this number of images, and this is how there's the vulnerability that is in there, right? But ECR and container images, EC2 machines, and then Lambda functions, right? So that's the thing you need to pay attention to. In this case, let me refresh. Let me still find this guy that is not acting as expected. Bucket versioning is still disabled, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, let me go back to, where is the other bucket here? The one that is prod, right? So let me go here. This one was enabled for us then, right? So let me suspend it and see. Acknowledge that I'm suspending this, and then let me suspend it and see what's going to happen. Let me see what's going to happen. While that is ongoing, let me go back to my resources, for example. So I'm going to go to resources here, and then see the one that is, dashboard, the one non-compliant rules. Yeah, this is obviously just, the rule that is non-compliant, right? But this one, for example, if you go, and I'm trying to see the resource timeline, this is 829. Not sure what is 829 now. Is this dev or what? This is me. I just put tag. Stop recording changes, configuration change. I did put tag in. Okay, let me now go back to my dashboard and see what happens. Remember, I disabled the one for prod, right? So let's go there and see 3 compliant resources. Did you notice that I disabled the one I did disable this one, right? It was suspended. I suspended it, right? So if you notice, I suspended this one, but it's still showing me that it's compliant. So let me see what's happening. It's suspended. Maybe it has not just evaluated. I think, config usually just, it takes some time for you to see the rules, but let's give it some time. Let's see the non-compliant ones first. And let's see prod. And then let's see the timeline. And then let's see configuration change. What did I do? Status is off. And then someone enabled it again. Okay. This is 8:58. This time it's going to be confusing. 18:58. That was long before now, right? We just need to give it time. It hasn't recorded the new event that was there. It hasn't captured that one. Let's give it some time. I think this one is new. 1736. This one is enabled to suspended. Okay, so that one did happen. So this was the event configuration change. Let's see. It just takes some time for these things to propagate, but let's give it some time. So it's still suspended. 36, 35. So let's see how many are non-compliant now. We have 4 that are non-compliant now. Uh, oh, I think I see the problem. So I don't know if you were seeing the if you saw, I think the problem is actually here. You can see it has manual remediation, so that's the problem, right? So I think that's where we got the configuration wrong, because I did set it to manual remediation. So that's what I'm wondering now. Why has it not happened, right? So I'll just do save changes now. Yeah, it's because I was like, what's going on? So it's manual. I did set it to manual remediation. It's supposed to be automatic, right? So manual could be like you're remediating it yourself, but in this case, um, or like, manual means, yeah, it's going to show you that it's there, but you can basically trigger a step that helps you do the remediation. But in this case, I've gone to return it back to automatic. So let's see the magic. The magic is going to happen after a while now. I'm very sure of that. I think that was a problem here. Let me just be sure it's there. So it's now automatic. Maximum retry attempts 5, retrying blah blah blah. It's going to do some things. And we did give it a bucket, so it's still dev. It's going to check in this case, right? And then we did say like a role to use. It just depends on complex and whatever you're trying to do. But I'm just going to save the change. It's still there. So let's go and check the bucket again and see what happens. I think after a while this should have been fixed. So let's see properties. Versioning is still disabled, so it's fine. But again, if we give it time, it's going to run again. The remediation before was manual, but I did move it back to automatic now, so it should be good. Let me see dashboard to see the ones that are non-compliant. So 4 are non-compliant at the moment. Let's see, it's still this one. It's still non-compliant. Sometimes in the cloud there are some services that are just easy to some it will take time. So let's see. Let's say I don't know if I should just reevaluate it now so that it does it again, and then let's see if it's going to, if it's going to fix it. But yeah, I think I'll still come back to the slide again to see like if it's done. But again, remember we switched from manual remediation to automatic remediation. So I think after a while we should see it kicking now, right? So delete rule, delete results. Let me just edit the rule. Uh, um, no, that's not what I'm supposed to check. Um, yeah, so let's still wait for a while, give it some time. Yeah, let's just give it some time to run. While that is ongoing, let's continue. Let's check the slide to see what's happening. So we've seen inspector, right? So really you can respond to those events, right? So the events that we saw, you can basically go back to them and check whatever is wrong. And you can do many things, right? Because many of the services in AWS, they have like tight integration with other services that can actually help you, whether it's notification, you want to notify people, whether you want to take actions, especially with Event Bridge, it makes a lot of things also powerful, right? Some things, have native integration with Event Bridge. What just means is that these are events that are happening within the system, and Event Bridge can actually capture those events, and from there you can wire out that order automation, right? Um, so the class is already getting long, but we still need to touch on Cognito. Remember, I was talking about security models in the cloud, right? So yeah, there's still some we have not talked about, but today we still need to talk about Cognito. And what is Cognito? Cognito is basically, if you want to, like, if you started hosting applications in the cloud, you need authentication. You need to do authentication in an easy way, right? You could do yours, right? You could set up your own custom authentication if you wanted, right? Just come up with like your own authentication framework if you had one, right? But you can also do it in the cloud, right? Do it with AWS, and such that from ground up, scale is already part of the system. Yeah, so it's authentication. Cognito itself is like it's a massive service, because in there you have many things inside of it. But the whole idea is that if you really want to do access management and like user authentication in the cloud, Cognito is that service, right? So user identity service for your web and your mobile application, right? So what it means is that, and the good thing about Cognito is the fact that it's not just your web and your mobile application only, but you can still use those identities for even other areas of your application, right? So authentication is one thing you need to know. It does that, and it can also help you do the authorization also, right? So authentication is one thing. Authorization is something. It's a different thing entirely, right? So the thing is also, if you wanted to do like federated login, so someone wants to log into your application with Google, Facebook, they can all just use what do you call it, Cognito. You can use Cognito to do that, right? Remember, we're still talking about security, and you may ask me why not do yours, right? But the thing is that sometimes you're also trying to use something that is well tested, that is well used. People have used it, they have results for using it. Why do you want to reinvent the wheel? Why won't you use an existing solution for you to? And that's where Cognito comes in. That's like authentication, like a authentication and authorization service that has been tested by many people, and you can also just benefit from it, right? So, and just focus on your business instead of also thinking about how will you do authorization in the cloud, right? So, and then you can also do like enterprise federation if you also wanted to do, like using OpenID and SAML. What are the components of Cognito? You do have like a user pool. So user pool is really managing users. So you can obviously use like a pool to manage users in Cognito. But identity pool is really where the magic happens, especially around what do you call it, around the authentication, right? The user pools itself will keep the users, but the identity pools will do the AWS credential access, right, for the authenticated users now. So because users can be in your user pool, but if they really want to use the AWS services, that's where identity pool comes in, right? You can also, like, if you have like a front end UI, you can have like a hosted UI that would help you more or less like make it easy. So in there, someone can register, someone can sign up, and someone can even log in. So what it means is that you can have like a UI from Cognito to just put in your application without reinventing the wheel. And then you can have custom authentication flow, right? So if what you have is not if what AWS gives you, you want to do more, you can bring in your own custom authentication flow, right? So web, mobile app, you can use that, and then they connect to like a Amazon Cognito user pool, and then from there you can also even integrate your third-party identity providers into your application, right? And then you can have like one suite to just manage everything at the go. So when you think about what that looks like, you can also get multi-factor authentication already out of the box, right? SMS, email, you can get all that. User management, like I mentioned, registration, password resets, profiles, all that can come with it. Can come with Cognito. Advanced security, and obviously compliance also is also packed as part of it. Use case, mobile apps. So if you're thinking of authentication, like if you're thinking of building a mobile application in the AWS cloud, and you're thinking of how will I secure it, Cognito will do that easily for you, right? So mobile application, web application user management, API access control, because you can also integrate Cognito to other services in AWS, right? And use the same user pool to do many other fancy things within the system, right? And then you can do enterprise identity foundation, meaning you can bring in, like, you can federate people from other parts of the from their external identity, so you can federate them into AWS, right? Using Cognito. This class is already getting too long, so I'm going to stop here. But again, I still need to go back to why that guy it hasn't done what it's meant to do. Let me just check again and see how many is non-compliant in this case. Let's see what's happening. So yeah, I think now it worked. So if you notice, it has gone, right? So I think if you see the dev, remember the last time I was on this page, it was disabled, right? It was disabled. But if I refresh this page, you notice that it has been enabled back, right? So I think that manual remediation that we did put was what was stopping, wasn't making it to work. But once it became automatic, it did this. I think why prod was not affected is because if you notice for prod, for example, where is even prod safe? Yeah, I know prod is non-compliant, right? So, but dev was really, remember we tied the rule to dev, right? So if you go back to the rule, if you check the rules is here. If you scroll down, we did tie it to a bucket, right? So there's a bucket here. So my demo bucket CDK Brainyl dev, right? So it did actually remediate that bucket. That's exactly what happened just now. So if I go to rules, for example, and I go to that bucket, so let me actually go to dashboard, go to let me see even both compliance resources, and then go to the dev that was non-compliant at a time that is now compliant. Let's see what happened. So you can see resource timeline, for example. I think this was where we were looking at it. I think I did leave, and then I think put bucket versioning obviously happened at some point, probably when we're still having this conversation, right? And then there was like a switch. So the remediation did happen. You can see the username. If you check the difference between the username, right? So if you see, for example, let me see. You can see, for example, the difference, right? One is Brainyl here. This is me, CloudTrail events, doing something, right? It's different from the one that happened through an automation, right? So it did do it for us once we enabled automatic remediation. So you know that these are all policies you can set, but you can also do it, operate at the compliance level, right? So just you're putting an eye on making sure that, okay, are things doing fine? But you can also remediate stuff automatically, right? There are so many remediations you can put. So for example, if you go here and you do rules, add rule. No, I'm actually trying to go to the rules that we have. So let me go to rules that we already have. So any of these rules, remember the remediation will be based on the rule, right? So in that case, we're dealing with a bucket, but there could be many. There could be MFA, for example, if you're searching for, like, if the person, there's no, maybe MFA was searching for, you can see MFA enabled for IAM console access. Like if somebody is accessing the console, do they have MFA? S3 MFA delete enabled, meaning if somebody is trying to delete a bucket, maybe MFAs, all that. What it just means is that if you have all these as part of rules, you can operate in the compliance mode, meaning you're seeing what is right and what is not right. But you can also operate on the remediation mode, meaning it happens and you remediate it immediately, meaning you just revert the condition, right? I think it's a good place to stop for the class so that we don't, but all this will be part of the recording so that for those who couldn't wait till the end, they'll get it.